What if the game you played for fun started playing you back? Tonight's story begins like any other Friday night. 7 friends, a table, character sheets, dice rolling across worn wood under dim yellow light. But when one of those dice turns out not to belong to this world, the line between imagination and reality doesn't just blur. It disappears. If you enjoy dark fantasy horror, cursed worlds, and stories where escape slowly becomes impossible, you're in the right place. Now, roll for initiative. This is Dungeons and Dice. The rain hit the windows of the small house like impatient fingers, tapping out a rhythm that never quite settled into comfort. Inside, the living room was warm, but only physically. Emotionally, it felt like a sealed chamber. 7 friends sat around a heavy wooden table scarred with knife marks, ink stains, and the ghosts of old games. Sarah sat closest to the lamp, her face soft but tired, eyes always watching everything at once, like she was the unofficial keeper of reality. Ross leaned back in his chair, half smiling like nothing in the world could truly hurt him. Stephen was already flipping through his character sheet for the 5th time, muttering stats under his breath. Slugger, real name forgotten by everyone including himself, laughed too loudly at jokes that weren't funny. Guy was sharpening a pencil like it was a ritual. Wesley sat quietly, observant, like he always did. And Cathy. Cathy was different tonight. She had brought something. A small wooden box. Old. Too old. I found it while tearing out my grandmother's story, she said, sliding it onto the table. The wood didn't match the rest of the room. It looked older than the house itself. Dark, almost black in the grain, with carvings around the edges that didn't look decorative so much as instructional. Stephen frowned. That looks like prop stuff, like movie set junk. Cathy shrugged. Maybe. But look what was inside. She opened it. Inside sat a single die. Not plastic, not metal. Bone. The table went quiet in a way that felt immediate, like sound itself had been turned off. Even Slugger didn't joke. Ross leaned forward. Okay, that's actually kind of sick. Sarah didn't touch it. Where did you say this came from? My grandmother's attic. She said not to throw it away, but also not to use it. Guy laughed nervously. That's not ominous at all. Cathy smiled faintly. It's just a dice. But it wasn't. The symbols carved into it didn't match any known system. Not D20. Not runic alphabets they had seen online. It looked like language that had never been meant to be read, only obeyed. Wesley finally spoke. We don't use it. Silence. Then Ross reached out. Come on. Don't be dramatic. He picked it up. It was colder than it should have been. Not cold like ice. Cold like something that had never known warmth. Just one roll, Ross said, grinning now, for fun. Sarah shook her head immediately. Ross. But it was already rolling. The die clicked across the table. Once, twice, and it stopped. All faces turned towards it. The number facing up wasn't a number. It was a symbol. A circle split into 7 jagged sections. Each section pulsed, just slightly, like it was breathing. The room went dead silent. Then the lamp flickered. Slugger swallowed. Okay. I don't like that. Stephen leaned in closer. That's not even a valid face. That's not... The symbol brightened. Just for a second. Like a camera flash inside their skulls. And then... the world broke. They didn't fall. They didn't scream. They simply stopped being in the room. When sensation returned, it did so violently. Wind. Cold. Wet stone under their hands. Guy gasped, choking on air that tasted like ash and iron. Slugger rolled onto his side, vomiting immediately. Sarah pushed herself up first, eyes wide, scanning. They were not in the house. They were on a road. A long, broken path cutting through a valley of dead trees and twisted stone. The sky above them was wrong. Too low, too heavy, swirling with bruised purple clouds that never stopped moving. Ross stared upward. Okay, this is a prank, right? This is VR. Somebody tell me this is VR. Stephen slowly stood, shaking. This is not VR. Cathy was gone for half a second. Then she appeared a few meters away, kneeling, laughing in disbelief. It worked. Sarah snapped her head towards her. What worked? Cathy looked up, eyes reflecting the sky like glass. The dice. A sound rolled across the valley. Not thunder. Something heavier. A distant horn. And then the trees moved. Not swaying. Turning. Like they were watching. They didn't understand the rules at first. There were rules. There always are in worlds like this. Slugger found out first when something tried to drag him into the trees. He screamed so loudly it echoed too long, like the valley itself refused to release the sound. Guy pulled him back, slamming him onto the road. And that was when they saw it. Creatures. Small shapes in the fog. Goblins. Not cartoonish, not game-like. Real in a way that made their stomachs twist. Yellow eyes. Skin like bruised leather. Teeth too many for their mouths. Ross whispered, "No way." Then one of them rushed. After that, everything became survival. Stephen grabbed a broken branch that hardened into something resembling a staff the moment he held it. Cathy began speaking words she didn't know she knew. Sarah pulled the group together, shouting orders like she had been doing it her whole life. Wesley fought like someone remembering a dream. Guy fought like someone trying not to die. They survived. Barely. But the night did not end. It simply deepened. By morning, they noticed the first shift. Slugger's teeth were sharper. Ross's hearing, too good. He winced every time something moved too far away. Stephen's fingers were stained faintly with ink-like markings that weren't there before. Cathy's shadow didn't match her movements. And Sarah could see further than she should have been able to. Guy noticed it first. "You guys, are you seeing this too?" No one answered, because they all were. The world was changing them, or revealing what they already were. Days blurred into something that stopped behaving like time. There was no sun cycle they could trust, only shifting light. Sometimes gold, sometimes blood red, sometimes an unnatural silver that made their skin itch. They traveled, because stopping felt like death. The road led them through broken kingdoms. Ruined stone cities with towers that leaned like tired giants. Fields where nothing grew except black grass that whispered when stepped on. Forests where trees had faces just beneath the bark, watching them pass. And always, the feeling of being followed. They made camp under a ridge of stone that looked almost like a collapsed crown. No one slept well. Guy stood watch first. He kept saying he was fine. He wasn't. The others dozed off in fragments, broken sleep, interrupted by dreams that didn't feel like dreams. Sarah woke first, because she heard it. A scream. Not loud, not immediate. Cut short. She ran. The others followed. They found Guy near the edge of the camp, half in shadow. Orcs. 3 of them. Massive things. Armored in scrap metal and bone, smelling like wet iron and burned earth. Guy was on the ground, not moving. Ross made a sound, something between anger and disbelief, and charged. What happened next was chaos. Steel, magic, panic. Slugger screamed. Stephen cast something that lit the ridge in blue fire. Cathy's voice cracked reality itself for a moment. But it was too late. Guy was gone before they reached him. When the orcs retreated, laughing in deep guttural tones, the silence that followed was worse than the fight. Sarah knelt beside Guy's body. He looked wrong, not just dead, edited out of the world. Like the land itself had decided he was no longer part of the story. Ross punched the ground until his knuckles bled. No one spoke for a long time, because speaking made it real. After Guy's death, the changes accelerated. They didn't just feel different anymore. They were becoming different. Slugger's skin hardened in places like layered bark. Ross's teeth sharpened slightly, his jaw more pronounced, more animal. Stephen began speaking in structured phrases that felt like spells even when he wasn't casting. Cathy's eyes sometimes flickered like burning dice faces. Sarah's presence felt heavier, like leadership had weight now. Wesley stopped bleeding properly when cut. No one said what they were thinking, because the truth was forming too clearly. They were becoming their characters. Not metaphorically, literally. They found her on the 11th day, a witch standing in a swamp that shouldn't have existed. She wore robes stitched from pages of unreadable books. Her face was young, then old, then young again, depending on how the fog moved. She looked at them like she had been expecting them. "You rode the gate die," she said. Cathy froze. "You know what it is?" The witch smiled. "It is not a tool."
"It is a sentence." Stephen stepped forward. "We need to get home." The witch tilted her head. "Home?" She laughed softly. The sound made the swamp tremble. "There is no home that reaches this place."
Ross grabbed his weapon. "There's always a way back." The witch looked at him. "No," she said gently. "There isn't." Then she pointed at them. "One of you is already becoming the ending." Silence. Sarah's voice shook. "What does that mean?" But the witch was already fading into mist. Her final words lingered. "When the last of you becomes what you were meant to be, the story closes." That night, no one slept. They sat in a circle like they were afraid that breaking formation would make it easier for the world to take them. Cathy finally spoke. "We can't go back." Ross snapped. "No, that's not true." Cathy's voice cracked.
"I think it is." Stephen stared into the fire. "This isn't a world we entered." He looked up slowly. "It's a world that accepted us." Slugger whispered, "So what? We just live here." Silence again.
Then Sarah said something none of them expected. "No." All eyes turned to her. "We've finished the story." Wesley frowned. "What story?" Sarah looked into the fire like she could see something beyond it. "The one the dice started. They found the final road the next morning. It wasn't there before. It simply existed now, leading upward into a mountain shaped like a broken crown. At the peak, something waited. They could all feel it. The end of the world they were in, or the beginning of what they were becoming. As they walked, each of them changed further. Slugger barely looked human anymore. His movements too silent, too forest-like. Ross's eyes reflected light like a predator. Stephen's hands constantly traced symbols in the air. Cathy spoke to something invisible beside her. Wesley walked like a man already half-shadow. Sarah stayed the most human, which scared her the most, because she understood what that meant. Halfway up the mountain, Sarah finally admitted it aloud. "We're not trying to escape this world." They stopped. Wind howled around them. Sarah's voice was steady now, terrifyingly calm. "We're being written into it." Ross shook his head. "No, we're real." Sarah turned to him. So was Guy. That shut everything down, because nobody could argue with that. Not anymore. The mountain didn't feel like they were climbing it. It felt like it was letting them ascend. That was the first thing Sarah noticed. The second thing was worse. The world around them was starting to react to who they were becoming, not who they were. Stone shifted slightly under Slugger's feet, like it recognized him as part of the forest now. Ross's shadow stretched ahead of him even when the sun wasn't behind him. Stephen's whispered incantations sometimes made the air answer back. Cathy no longer blinked normally. Wesley stopped breathing for long stretches and didn't notice. Sarah could hear the story. Not voices, not thoughts. Something deeper, like the world itself was reading from an invisible script, and she could finally understand the language. On the third ascent day, they stopped being a group of friends traveling together. They started becoming something else. It began with Slugger. They found him crouched near a cliff edge, staring at the rock face like it was speaking to him. "I can hear it," he whispered. Ross frowned.
"Hear what?" Slugger didn't look back. The roots, under everything. Then his fingers sank slightly into the stone, not breaking it, blending with it. Sarah stepped forward. "Slugger, come back."
He turned slowly. His eyes were no longer fully human. "They don't want me to leave," he said softly. "I think I was always supposed to stay here." And before anyone could reach him, he stepped backward into the cliff wall.
Not falling, not slipping, entering. The rock swallowed him like water. Gone. Just gone. Ross shouted his name until his voice cracked.
But the mountain didn't echo it back. It absorbed it, like it was eating sound. Night came early. Or maybe it didn't come at all. They just noticed darkness gathering like ink spilling into water. That's when she appeared again. The witch of hollow mist. Except now she wasn't alone. There were more shapes behind her in the fog. Faceless, watching. She looked at them with tired familiarity. "You are thinning," she said. Stephen stepped forward, furious. "You said there was no way back." "There isn't," she replied. Cathy tilted her head slightly. "Then why are we still becoming something?" The witch smiled faintly. "Because the story still requires you." Sarah's stomach tightened. "What story?" The witch raised a hand, pointing up the mountain. "The one that ends." Ross clenched his fists. "We didn't ask to be part of this." The witch's expression softened. "No one ever does." Then she looked directly at Sarah. "You hear it now, don't you?" Sarah didn't answer. Because yes, she did. The rhythm beneath everything, like dice rolling endlessly in a place without time. The witch nodded slowly, like that was answer enough. "When you reach the crown," she said, "you will understand what you roll." Then she and the fog vanished, leaving only silence, and the feeling that something had been added to the world while they were not looking. The next transformation wasn't subtle. It never was anymore. Ross changed during the climb through the ridge of broken spires. At first, it was just aggression, too fast, too instinctive. Then his teeth sharpened further. His nails darkened. His movements stopped resembling a man entirely and started resembling something that hunted men. Stephen noticed first. "Ross," he said carefully, "slow down." Ross turned. His eyes were not fully his anymore. "I can see them before they move," he said. Cathy stepped back slightly. "That's not normal."
Ross smiled, but it was wrong, too wide. Nothing here is normal. Then he lunged forward suddenly. Not at them, but past them. Something in the fog had moved. Something they couldn't see.
But Ross could. And when it ended, when the fog cleared, there was nothing left of what he attacked. Only silence. Sarah whispered, "Ross, what are you becoming?" He didn't answer, because he didn't know anymore. On the 7th ascent day, the mountain finally opened. Not literally, symbolically. The fog peeled back like old fabric being torn. There it was. The crown. A massive structure carved into the peak itself. Stone shaped like a broken circlet, jagged and endless, stretching into impossible geometry that hurt to look at directly. It didn't look built. It looked remembered. Stephen went pale. "That's not architecture." Cathy whispered, "That's a boundary." Wesley finally spoke after days of silence. "It's a limit." Sarah felt it in her bones. This was where the world stopped pretending and told the truth. They entered the crown at dusk. Inside, everything was quieter. Too quiet. Like sound itself was being held hostage. Cathy stopped walking halfway through the inner gate. "Wait," she said softly. Everyone turned. She was staring at her hands. They were flickering, not fading, becoming transparent. Stephen rushed forward. "Cathy, what's happening?" Cathy looked up, eyes calm in a way that made it worse. "I think I was never meant to leave the box." Ross shook his head. No, that's not." But Cathy smiled faintly. "I think I was always just the role." Sarah stepped forward. "Don't say that." Cathy looked at her, and for a moment she looked almost human again. I'm sorry, she whispered. Then she collapsed into light. Not death, not disappearance. More like being recorded elsewhere. Then she was gone. The group didn't even get time to process it, because the crown was already closing behind them. Inside the crown, reality stopped behaving like reality. Hallways folded into themselves. Time moved in wrong directions. Sometimes they saw versions of themselves already dead. Sometimes they saw versions that never came this far. Stephen began crying without realizing it. This isn't a world, he said. It's a mechanism. Wesley nodded slowly. A system. Ross growled low and animal now. Something's controlling it. Sarah stopped walking because she finally understood. No, she said quietly. It turned to her. Her eyes reflected something none of them could see. It's not controlling it. She swallowed. It's rolling it. Silence. Even Ross stopped moving. Stephen whispered, "The dice." Sarah nodded. The dice wasn't a portal. Her voice shook slightly now. It was a command.
They reached it at the center of the crown. A vast circular chamber made of rotating stone faces, each carved with symbols that shifted when not looked at directly. In the center floated it, the die, the same bone dice.
But now it was enormous, too large to comprehend properly. And inside it, something was moving, not trapped, contained. A presence older than the world they were in, older than the game they thought they were playing. A voice echoed without sound. Roll. The entire chamber trembled. Ross dropped to one knee, shaking. No. Stephen backed away. That's not a voice. That's a function. Wesley whispered. It's asking for completion. Sarah stepped forward, and something inside her clicked into place. The story wasn't trying to kill them. It was trying to finish them. Before she could move further, Sarah saw him. Guy, standing at the edge of the chamber, whole, alive. Sarah froze. Guy. He smiled sadly. I'm not here, he said gently. Ross snarled. We watched you die. Guy nodded. Yes. Stephen whispered, then what are you? Guy looked at the dice. I'm the part of the story that reminds you what happens when you stop rolling. Then he faded. Not gone. Just no longer needed. The chamber spoke again. Roll. The die hovered lower. Waiting. Wesley shook his head. If we roll it, we finish the game. Stephen looked terrified. And if we don't? The answer came immediately. The world shook slightly, as if laughing. Sarah stepped forward. I think we already rolled it, she said. Ross stared at her. Then what now? Sarah looked at each of them. What was left of them? We decide what the result means. The die rotated slowly in the air, waiting for interpretation. Not action, meaning. Sarah reached out and touched it. The moment her hand made contact, everything stopped. Not frozen, not paused. Observed. The world became aware of itself. The mountain, the crown, the forests, the goblins, the witches, Guy, Cathy, Slugger. All of it existed like ink on paper. And Sarah understood. They were not inside a world. They were inside a session. A story being played by something beyond them. And now, it was waiting for closure. Sarah spoke softly. What if we don't end? The voice responded instantly. Then you continue. Ross stepped forward. Continue what? The die pulsed. The game. Stephen whispered, horrified. We're characters. Wesley corrected him quietly. We always were. One by one, they began to settle into their forms. Not death, not escape. Definition. Ross became something like a guardian predator of the realm, bound to its edges. Stephen's body filled with glowing script, becoming a living archive of rules. Wesley dissolved into shadow that could pass between moments. Sarah felt it last. The weight of leadership, the narrative anchor, The one who speaks. The one who decides. Sarah looked at what remained of her friends, and she understood the cruel mercy. If she refused, they would loop, forever rolling, forever trapped in unfinished story. If she accepted, they would remain, but they would remain meaningfully. She closed her eyes and made the final choice. Yes, the die stopped spinning. The world stabilized. The crown mountain became quiet again. And somewhere beyond the story, a hand picked up notes, smiled faintly, and continued writing. And so the journey doesn't end. It simply continues beyond what we know. 7 friends rolled a single die, and the game rolled back. If you enjoyed this dark fantasy horror story, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because next time, the world they've entered may finally decide what each of them is meant to become. Until then, watch your dice carefully, because some games don't end when you stop playing.